Washington, D.C., capital of the United States, where power manifests itself on every street corner, in every imposing building with white columns, in every car with tinted windows gliding silently towards confidential meetings. Here, decisions shaping the world are made in cozy offices with dazzling chandeliers, while men and women in suits cross the wide avenues, absorbed in conversations where the future of the nation is at stake. That morning, the air was cool and charged with the usual tension of a city where politics and military strategy dictate the tempo. In one of the most prestigious hotels in the city center, a major event had just ended. The annual National Security Conference, a summit bringing together generals, senior intelligence officials and influential government figures, saw the sharpest minds in the country parade. Among them, General Marcus Caldwell, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces. Aged 54, Marcus Caldwell was a living legend in military circles. His name inspired both respect and admiration. He was one of those who had carved their place in history, not through favoritism or inheritance, but through perseverance, intelligence and extraordinary strategic mastery. Son of a Vietnam War veteran and a military nurse, he had grown up in rigor and discipline. From a young age, he had learned the value of hard work and dedication. But most importantly, he had learned that for a black man in America, even wearing a uniform did not guarantee respect. His military career was impeccable. A graduate of West Point with honors, he had served in the most sensitive conflicts of the past 30 years. His strategic decisions had saved thousands of lives on the ground. He had negotiated with foreign heads of state, advised presidents, directed clandestine operations of which only a few insiders knew existed. Today he was the head of the United States Armed Forces, a position he held with a mixture of authority and wisdom. And yet, despite his status, despite his medals, despite the services he had rendered to his country, in the eyes of some, he was still just a black man. The conference had just ended, and the distinguished guests were leaving the hotel in small groups, accompanied by their assistants and security teams. The hotel, a five-star establishment whose crystal chandeliers lit the lobby, had hosted confidential discussions and strategic agreements behind closed doors. Marcus Caldwell walked down the marble steps, his military attaché at his side, calmly discussing the points discussed during the meeting. The man who accompanied him, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Meyer, was a white officer in his 40s, a loyal collaborator of the general for several years. Both moved with measured, serene steps, reflecting the discipline inherent to their profession. A few meters from them, a black armored sedan waited, engine running. The general's driver, a seasoned sergeant, stood next to the vehicle, ready to open the door for his superior. It is at this precise moment that Agent Bradley noticed him. Bradley was a portly man in his 40s, with a sulphurous reputation that preceded his name in the corridors of the police department. His record was full of accusations of racial discrimination and abuse of power, but he always knew how to navigate the flaws in the system. Each time, internal investigations concluded that there was a lack of evidence, and his colleagues, although aware of his questionable methods, preferred to look the other way. That day, posted at the entrance to the five-star hotel, Bradley observed the comings and goings of guests with particular attention. His gaze stopped on a black man in an impeccable suit, walking with a natural ease that irritated him without really knowing why. The man was alone, upright, sure of himself, and that was enough to arouse his suspicions. A well-dressed black man, leaving a luxury hotel, without an escort or luggage. Bradley frowned. It seemed suspicious to him. With a determined step, he left his post and walked towards him, his chest out, his gaze hard. He wanted to impose his presence before even opening his mouth. "Hey you!" he barked in a dry voice. "What are you doing here?" Marcus Caldwell stopped short. With a simple movement of his eyebrow, he expressed both his surprise and his annoyance. He was used to the sideways glances, the implicit questions, but this brutal approach exasperated him. "Excuse-me?" he asked in a measured tone. Bradley didn't even bother to respond to his astonishment. He stood in front of him like a barrier of flesh and uniform, his chin raised in an air of defiance. "I asked you a question," he continued in a condescending tone. Why are you hanging around here? This hotel is not for you. The implication was clear, and Marcus felt it like an invisible slap. He didn't need to turn his head to feel the tension building behind him. His military attaché, a white man in his 30s, took a step forward, ready to intervene. Agent, this man is. Marcus raised his hand, stopping her with a simple gesture. He knew how these situations escalated too easily, and there was no way he was going to give Bradley any excuse to go any further. I just came from a conference, Agent, he replied with controlled calm. Now, if you'll let me pass. Bradley didn't move an inch. He narrowed his eyes and looked around, as if looking for a legitimate reason to detain him. A conference, eh? He let out a grin before crossing his arms. I will need to see identification. Marcus felt his blood pounding in his temples. He knew this game. He already knew that he was not trying to verify his identity, but to challenge it. Taking a quiet breath, he took out his wallet and slowly removed his card holder. The gold military badge was neatly inserted there, gleaming in the daylight as a silent reminder of his rank. Bradley took a quick look, not even bothering to examine it seriously. His sneer was immediate, enough to trigger a shiver of exasperation in the military attaché. Nice fake badge, he said with a mocking smile. Do you think you have me like that? Marcus clenches his jaw. It's not a fake badge. I am the General-in-Chief of the United States Army. A tense silence ensued. The military attaché crossed his arms, looking ready to fight. Bradley burst into loud, theatrical laughter. And I am the President of the United States. Then, without further warning, Bradley violently grabbed Marcus' arm and turned him around with brutal force. The impact was sharp, implacable. An ominous crack echoed as Marcus was forced to bend under the officer's unyielding grip. Hands behind your back. Immediately. Bradley roared, handcuffing him with a quick and brutal gesture. The cold metal closed around Marcus' wrists with a merciless clank, cutting the air like a silent verdict. The passers-by stopped in their tracks, frozen by the surreal scene unfolding before their eyes. A murmur of disbelief rose among them, soon followed by the mechanical whisper of hastily pulled-out cell phones. Cameras focused on the arrest, capturing every moment of this public humiliation. Marcus Caldwell, one of the most respected men in the country, stood there, handcuffed like a low-level criminal, in the heart of the city. The irony was overwhelming. A man who had led military operations, who had met heads of state, who had taken an oath to defend the nation, thus found himself belittled by a simple police officer blinded by his prejudices. His military attaché, who until then had been restrained, felt a surge of rage in his throat. His face hardened as he took a step forward, his eyes burning with indignation. Agent Bradley, let go of him now.
You don't know what you're doing.
Bradley, far from being impressed, gave him a contemptuous look and sharply pushed him away. I know exactly what I'm doing, he spat. This guy is trying to pass himself off as a general. He will spend the night in the cell. A satisfied sneer twisted his lips as he stood up proudly, convinced that he had accomplished his duty. He only saw what he wanted to see. A black man in a suit in a luxury neighborhood, obviously an imposter, definitely a liar. Marcus, still silent, felt rage burning in his chest. But he knew. He knew that the slightest movement of protest, the smallest spark of indignation, could be interpreted as a threat. He knew that history was littered with the names of black men gunned down for less than that. He knew Bradley was looking for an excuse. So he doesn't say anything. But he didn't need it. Because at that precise moment, a dull noise split the tense atmosphere. A black SUV with tinted windows came into the street and stopped abruptly in front of them, tires screeching against the asphalt. The door opened with a sharp slam, and two men in military uniforms quickly got out. Silence fell on the scene. Then, a figure emerged from the shadow of the vehicle. A man in a dark suit, with an icy presence, strode forward. His face was frozen in an expression of suppressed anger, his clenched jaw betraying a fury he was trying hard to tame. The Secretary of Defense himself. With a sharp gaze, he scanned the scene, lingering for a brief moment on Marcus, handcuffed like a common thug. Then his eyes fell on Bradley, and in that look there was an implacable judgment, a silent condemnation that made the agent shudder. He stopped a few inches away, his tone sharp as a blade. "Take these handcuffs off him. Right away." Bradley hesitated. He looked nervously from Marcus to the Secretary of Defense, then to the uniformed officers who were watching him with icy intensity. He felt the trap closing on him, but his pride still refused to give in. "Sir, this guy. The Secretary of Defense roared, his voice thundering in the heavy silence. "This is your hierarchical superior." The impact of the words was instantaneous. Bradley turned livid. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. His hands shook slightly as he looked at Marcus with wide eyes, finally realizing the magnitude of his mistake. A heavy silence stretched on, punctuated only by the shocked murmurs of passers-by and the flashing of phones which continued to record every second of this humiliating scene. Finally, reluctantly, Bradley complied. He untied the handcuffs with stiff and unsteady movements, avoiding the general's piercing gaze. Marcus Caldwell didn't move immediately. He stood still for a moment, his wrists aching, before slowly rubbing his skin marked by the steel of the handcuffs. When he looked up at Bradley, his gaze was absolutely cold. "I've served this country longer than you've worn this uniform, Agent Bradley." His voice was low, but each syllable was sharp as a blade. "I have led men in terrain where you would not survive a single day. I have made decisions that have changed the course of battles. I represented this nation against the greatest powers in the world." He paused, then continued sharply. "And yet all you saw in me today was a suspicious black man." Bradley swallowed hard, unable to answer. Around them, no one spoke. The air was thick with overwhelming tension. The Secretary of Defense then turned to a new arrival. The police chief, panting, had just arrived on the scene, his face pale. "This man must be suspended immediately," he ordered in an icy tone. "I demand a detailed report before the end of the day." The police chief nodded, his forehead beaded with sweat. Meanwhile, video of the incident continued to circulate. Within hours, it went viral. The television channels broadcast endless images of the General-in-Chief of the American Army, handcuffed and humiliated in the street by a racist police officer. Social networks were set ablaze. The scandal exploded nationally. Talk shows debated it passionately. Voices were raised from all horizons. Some denounced a blatant abuse of power, a perfect example of systemic discrimination. Others tried to downplay the matter, but were quickly overwhelmed by popular outrage. The President of the United States himself had to intervene. He personally called Marcus Caldwell to apologize on behalf of the government. But Marcus knew that apologies weren't enough. A few days later, he spoke at a press conference expected by hundreds of journalists. Silence fell in the room as he took the stage, imposing in his dark suit. He stared at the assembly for a moment before taking a deep breath. "I was not in uniform that day," he began, his voice ringing loudly. "I didn't have my medals or my stripes. But should I wear my uniform at all times to be respected?" He looked around the room. How many black men and women, without uniform, without status, experience this humiliation every day without any camera being there to bear witness?
A chill ran through the audience.
Today it was me. But tomorrow it will be yet another. A heavy silence fell over the room. Marcus Caldwell had just stated a brutal truth, a truth that America could no longer ignore. A few days later, Bradley was officially fired after an internal investigation. But the matter did not end there. Under pressure from public opinion, a reform of the police was proposed to Congress. New measures were introduced, reinforced training on racial prejudice, harsher sanctions in cases of abuse of power, increased supervision of the police forces. Marcus Caldwell, meanwhile, continues to serve his country. But that day, he had also served a greater cause. And for the first time in a long time, America was forced to face it.